They said the falls were beautiful until they heard the voices beneath the mist. What the mist conceals. Dr. Rebecca Chen first noticed the faces in the mist at some point of her 6th week studying microorganisms within the Niagara Falls spray zone. She'd been collecting samples from the statement deck while the afternoon light hit the perpetual fog just proper, and for a moment, only a quick, disorienting moment, the water droplets arranged themselves into human features. Hundreds of them. Thousands. All screaming silently within the roar of 6 million cubic feet of water in step with minute. "Did you notice that?" she asked her study's assistant, Marcus. "See what?" "The faces in the mist. They," Rebecca stopped, seeing Marcus's concerned expression. "In no way mind, pareidolia, the brain seeing styles where none exist." But that night, reviewing her pattern photos, Rebecca noticed them again. Not pareidolia, not random patterns. Real faces rendered in water droplets, performing and disappearing inside the consistent turnover of mist, each one distinct, every one twisted inside the equal expression of drowning terror. She started researching the fall's records of demise. The numbers were marvelous, over 5,000 documented deaths for the reason that information started out inside the 1800s and countless more earlier than that. Suicides, accidents, daredevils whose stunts failed, tourists swept over the threshold. The Niagara River did not simply kill people, it accrued them. Everybody that went over the falls, each person who drowned in the rapids above, each victim of the relentless modern, they all have been decreased to droplets, aerosolized into mist, suspended in the everlasting spray that rose from the falls like breath from a dwelling element. "You're saying the mist is made from lifeless people?" Marcus requested when she defined her idea. "I'm pronouncing the mist incorporates molecular remnants of all of us who died here. Water molecules from our bodies, included into the fall's continuous cycle. You're respiratory them proper now. All of us are. The spray sector is saturated with human remains on the molecular level. This is demanding but now not supernatural. Simply chemistry. Besides, they may be no longer random molecules anymore." Rebecca pulled up her analysis. "I have been monitoring the droplet formations. They're organizing themselves, arranging into patterns that replicate human features with statistical impossibility. It is like the water remembers what it used to be, recollects being part of human beings, and it is trying to recreate those human beings within the handiest medium it has, mist." Over the subsequent weeks, Rebecca documented the phenomenon obsessively. The faces seemed most regularly in the course of temperature inversions, whilst atmospheric conditions precipitated the mist to grasp heavier than common. She photographed masses of awesome faces, ran them through facial popularity databases, and located fits, missing people, documented suicide victims, twist of fate casualties. The mist become reconstructing the useless with their very own molecules. But reconstruction wasn't the endpoint. The faces have been becoming greater complicated, more chronic, extra three-dimensional. Rebecca watched them evolve from dimensional patterns into crude approximations of full bodies, water droplets clustering into human shapes that moved via the spray with nearly purposeful motion. "They're seeking to reform," she advised Marcus in the course of one past due-night observation consultation. "All of us who died here, decreased to water, they're attempting to reconstitute themselves, using the mist as transient physical form." "Why? What would useless humans reformed from mist even need?" "Perhaps not anything. Maybe they are simply responding to some base molecular reminiscence, like crystals forming in step with structure. Or perhaps," Rebecca educated her camera on a specially nicely shaped parent drifting through the spray, "maybe they want a complete drowning, to complete the loss of life they experienced. The falls killed them, however, didn't let them move, converted them into its perpetual cycle. They've been suspended in that second of dying for decades, for hundreds of years. Not able to finish, not able to relaxation." The figure she became filming grew to become towards her. Its face, barely distinguishable from the encircling mist, wore an expression of such profound ache that Rebecca stumbled backward. And then it spoke. Now not with vocal cords, it had none, however, through modulation of the fall's constant roar, shaping the white noise into something that approximated language. Assist us, help us finish, help us sooner or later drown. Rebecca dropped her digicam. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her back from the railing. We need to leave, now. But more figures were manifesting, dozens of them coalescing from the spray. All of them drifting towards Rebecca and Marcus with that identical horrible expression, they all modulating the roar into pleading. Assist us drown, help us die, assist us forestall being water. They fled the remark deck, however the mist observed. It seeped via doorways, condensed on home windows, pursued them through the fall's tourist facilities like a conscious aspect. Anywhere the spray reached, and it reached anywhere inside 1 to a kilometer of the falls, the figures should happen. How can we assist them? Marcus requested when they'd barricaded themselves in Rebecca's studies lab. How do you assist mist drown? I do not know. Water is already the drowning medium. They are literally fabricated from the thing that killed them. How do you drown something this is drowning? Rebecca accessed her studies, desperately searching for solutions. The mist figures could not exist independently of the fall's spray. They had been bound to it, created by it, dissolved when they drifted too a long way from the supply. But inside the spray quarter, they were growing more potent, more numerous, greater determined. And they have been affecting the living. Travelers who ventured too near the commentary structures stated trouble breathing, sensations of drowning regardless of being on dry land. The mist was coming into lungs, re-experiencing its very own demise through the living, attempting to complete its drowning the usage of borrowed bodies. We want to forestall the falls, Rebecca stated all of a sudden. Forestall Niagara Falls. It truly is insane. It really is. The best solution. As long as water falls, so long as mist rises, the reconstitution will preserve. The molecular remnants will preserve looking to reform, preserve attempting to complete death. We need to break the cycle, even quickly. Supply them a chance to, I do not know, settle, expend, emerge as just water again instead of the memory of those who became water. You cannot forestall Niagara Falls. It is one in all the biggest waterfalls inside the International. The glide is controlled by treaties. Via strength era requirements, by means of. An alarm blared through the facility. Rebecca checked the security feed and felt her blood freeze. The mist had grown dense, sufficient to obscure the falls absolutely. A strong wall of white extending hundreds of meters into the air. And inside it, hundreds of figures have been visible now, all the falls useless manifesting concurrently, all of them drifting closer to the populated regions surrounding the gorge. They're not going to look forward to us to assist them, Rebecca stated. They're going to make everyone drown, make the dwelling enjoy what they're experiencing, unfold the death until the entire spray sector is saturated with drowning. She grabbed her research materials, pulled up the fall's engineering schematics. The American Falls can be dewatered. They did it in 1969 for geological study, built a temporary cofferdam, diverted the glide. If we are able to do that again, interrupt the falling water on the American aspect, it'd break the reconstitution system lengthy enough for the molecular patterns to randomize. That takes months of planning, engineering approval, international coordination. We have hours at most earlier than. The building shuddered. Now not from structural failure, however, from stress. The mist urgent against walls, seeping through airflow, condensing on each surface. The lifeless had been coming into the study's facility, bringing their drowning with them. Rebecca and Marcus fled once more, this time towards the falls themselves. If they couldn't forestall the water officially, they'd do it unofficially, dangerously, desperately. They reached the manipulate structure that controlled drift to the Big Apple Power Authority. the tunnels that diverted river water to turbines before it could reach the falls. Emergency protocols allowed for fast drift adjustment in flood conditions. If Rebecca could cause those protocols, declare a false emergency, she may want to quickly reduce float over the American Falls to a trickle. "This is insane," Marcus stated as Rebecca hacked into the manipulate structures, overriding safety lockouts with emergency codes she'd acquired in the course of her months of research get entry to. "We are interfering with worldwide water treaties. We will go to jail." Higher than drowning on dry land, Rebecca entered the final command series. "All people in the spray area is drowning right now. The mist is of their lungs. The lifeless are the use of the dwelling to complete death. If we do not prevent the falls, forestall the reconstitution, this spreads, turns into pandemic. All of us who breathes the mist will become a drowning victim." She performed the override. Alarms screamed throughout the control facility as massive gates closed, diverting the Niagara River's complete go with the flow away from the Yank Falls towards the Canadian Horseshoe Falls. The Yankee side started out to slow, the thunderous roar diminishing, the perpetual mist starting to skinny. And the reconstituted figures started out to dissolve, their desperate accomplishing turning to confusion as the medium that sustained them dissipated. Without continuous mist to give them shape, the molecular styles could not maintain coherence. The useless have been turning into simply water once more, their attempted reformation failing. However, the death itself did not prevent. The figures weren't dispersing peacefully. They had been experiencing their deaths absolutely now, in the end completing what the falls had interrupted. Rebecca watched through the security video display units as lots of mist bureaucracy went through final drowning, their water droplet bodies convulsing with the remembered trauma of dying, all of them dying together for the last time. It took 3 hours. 3 hours of the American Falls reduced to a trickle, 3 hours of mist settling, 3 hours of the dead in the end being allowed to finish death and disperse into easy, non-conscious water molecules. While it turned into completed, while the ultimate determine had dissolved and the air in the spray sector turned into clear of human patterns, Rebecca restored normal float. The Yank Falls resumed its thunderous cascade, mist rising yet again. However, this time, Rebecca's units detected no enterprise inside the droplets. No faces. No attempted reconstitution. Just water being water and not using a memory of been human beings. The government arrived minutes later. Park rangers, facility security, finally FBI sellers investigating the unauthorized flow diversion. Rebecca surrendered peacefully, explained what she discovered and what she'd finished. They did not accept as true with her, of direction. The mist figures had left no bodily evidence. The drowning on dry land sufferers had recovered as soon as the mist dispersed, attributing their reports to panic attacks or environmental infection. Rebecca and Marcus have been charged with criminal trespass, machine tampering, violation of global water control treaties. The felony manner could take years, but sitting inside the holding cellular, looking information photos of travelers returning to Niagara Falls, Rebecca felt simplest relief. She'd freed them. The 5,000 dead, maybe more, perhaps tens of heaps whilst you counted deaths from earlier than records commenced, all of them eventually allowed to finish their drowning, to finish dying, to disperse into the river's flow and come to be simply water in place of water that remembered being human. "Changed into it worth it," Marcus requested from the adjoining mobile. "Jail time for stopping something most people don't even agree with passed off." "Yes," Rebecca stated truly. They'd been drowning for hundreds of years, suspended inside the moment of dying, converted into mist, unable to complete loss of life or begin being useless. I gave them 3 hours of falling float, 3 hours of thinning mist, 3 hours to sooner or later entire what the falls had interrupted. Well worth it. She turned into released on bail 3 months later. The prices reduced after professional testimony about her intellectual state, approximately the strain of long-term publicity to the falls environment. approximately how the steady roar may want to produce auditory hallucinations that seemed real. The clinical network disregarded her misdetermined documentation as artifact of atmospheric conditions, pareidolia recorded on digital camera in preference to simply perceived by using brain. But Rebecca knew what she'd visible, what she'd documented, what she'd freed. And occasionally, while she visited the falls during her court-mandated psychiatric evaluation period, she'd stand on the commentary deck and watch the mist upward thrust. It became simply mist now. Simply water droplets suspended in air, refracting mild, growing rainbows, behaving in keeping with bodily laws without attempting to do not forget or reconstitute or end dying. The useless were allowed to become fully dead. The water had been allowed to come to be simply water. And Niagara Falls thundered on, no longer a jail for 5,000 drowning victims, however simply a waterfall, vast and delightful and merciless, killing everybody foolish enough to mission it, but no longer maintaining their molecules suspended in limitless demise. Rebecca's research become confiscated, her documentation sealed as proof, her profession successfully destroyed. However past due at nighttime, she'd occasionally acquire nameless emails from different researchers, different scientists who'd noticed similar styles at other waterfalls, other places where water and death intersected. The Iguazu Falls in Argentina, Victoria Falls in Africa, Angel Falls in Venezuela. Anywhere water fell with enough pressure to create perpetual mist, everywhere enough humans had died that their molecules have been integrated into the spray. They were all asking the same question. Had she visible faces? Had she noticed attempted reconstitution? Had she observed a way to free the drowning? Rebecca could reply with everything she'd discovered, the whole thing she'd documented, the whole thing she'd executed. She'd become an casual expert on death via falling water, a consultant for the not possible hassle of molecular memory and mist, a guide for folks who had to free the suspended lifeless. It wasn't the career she'd planned. However, it was the profession she'd earned, status in the spray area of Niagara Falls, watching 5,000 human beings finally end drowning after centuries of suspension. Some knowledge got here with duty. A few discoveries demanded movement. Some clinical observations required freeing the useless. Rebecca had done that, had sacrificed her popularity, her freedom, her destiny to present the falls sufferers 3 hours of peace, 3 hours completion, 3 hours to finally prevent being water that remembered drowning and end up water that had forgotten what it was once. The mist rose from Niagara Falls, smooth and cold and containing no human styles. And Rebecca Chen watched it upward push, knowing she'd achieved the proper factor, the vital issue, the simplest component that a scientist with judgment of right and wrong ought to do whilst faced with 5,000 humans trapped in the second of loss of life. She'd help them end, help them drown nicely, help them subsequently, mercifully, end up completely useless. And every now and then, on positive atmospheric conditions, while the mist hung especially thick, Rebecca concept, she may want to listen something inside the falls roar, not pleading anymore, not desperation, but gratitude. The thankful silence of individuals who'd been struggling and were eventually allowed to relaxation. The water fell, the mist rose, and for the primary time in centuries, it contained nothing but water. The Barrel Riders. Sam Cartwright's remarkable grandfather had been the primary character to correctly experience Niagara Falls in a barrel in 1901. Bobby Leach had been the second in 1911. However consistent with the journal Sam discovered in his great-grandfather's effects, there have been others earlier than them, unsuccessful riders whose attempts had in no way been recorded, whose barrels were swallowed by way of the falls and never emerged at the lowest. The journal defined 16 failed tries between 1850 and 1900, each one witnessed through Sam's awesome grandfather and his children. And it described something else. The riders by no means died. Their barrels had been stuck in the undertow under the falls, trapped in the churning water, circulating endlessly in the hydraulic under the surface, in which the falling water created a perpetual cutting edge that never launched what it captured. "They're nonetheless down there," the journal examined in his awesome grandfather's shaky handwriting. "I pay attention them occasionally, whilst the falls are quiet on iciness nights. Their barrels tumbling in the undertow, the riders inside them screaming, drowning for a century and a 1-2 without the mercy of death. The falls may not allow them to die, might not allow them to get away. They're trapped within the moment of drowning, preserved by means of the steady oxygenated water, kept aware by means of the bloodless, experiencing every second of their dying for eternity." Sam had disregarded it because the ravings of an vintage man haunted via survivor's guilt. He'd succeeded where others had failed, had become well known even as they'd been forgotten. But then Sam commenced hearing the screaming himself. He became operating as a tour guide for the Cave of the Winds attraction, leading traffic along walkways at the bottom of the Bridal Veil Falls. The roar of falling water became deafening, making verbal exchange not possible. But below the roar, when Sam listened cautiously, he should hear other sounds. Thumping, whole wooden thumping like barrels hanging rock, and screaming, muffled by means of wooden and water but unmistakable. "Did you listen that?" he requested his coworker, Jennifer, after their shift. "Pay attention what? The falls, kind of hard to miss. Number below, screaming, and barrels hitting the rocks." Jennifer checked out him with subject. "Sam, you have been running here too long. The regular noise, the mist, the bloodless, it messes with people's perceptions. Take some days off." However, Sam could not take days off. He had to understand if his first-rate grandfather's journal became truth or delusion. He commenced researching the failed barrel tries, found newspaper debts from the 1800s describing daredevils who'd gone over the falls and honestly vanished. No our bodies recovered. No barrels found downstream. Simply long past, as though the falls had swallowed them completely. He additionally discovered something else, extra latest disappearances. In 1995, a kayaker had attempted the falls and vanished. In 2003, a base jumper's frame became by no means recovered. In 2017, a traveler who'd climbed over the safety barrier becomes swept over the edge. No remains ever discovered. The pattern persevered through many years, via centuries. The falls took human beings and in no way gave them back. Sam started out diving inside the swimming pools at the base of the falls throughout off hours, the usage of expert equipment rented from nearby dive stores, ignoring rules approximately diving within the turbulent waters. He had to see what was beneath, had to affirm or deny his top-notch grandfather's claims. On his fourth dive, 50 FT underneath the surface inside the churning water underneath Horseshoe Falls, Sam determined the primary barrel. It changed into wedged in the hydraulic contemporary, spinning slowly in the perpetual undertow, its wooden weathered but intact. Through a crack within the staves, Sam saw movement inside. A hand, nonetheless moving, nevertheless grasping, nevertheless alive after over a century underwater. He surfaced gasping, tore off his diving masks, vomited into the frigid water. It became authentic. His exceptional grandfather's magazine changed into completely, impossibly proper. The falls kept its victims alive in the undertow, trapped them in their barrels, preserved them inside the perpetually cold, oxygenated water at the same time as they drowned endlessly without the discharge of demise. "We need to get them out," Sam informed Jennifer the following day, displaying her his dive footage. The video became grainy. The churning water made clear pictures not possible, but the barrel turned into scene, and the hand accomplishing through its crack become unmistakable. "It's not possible," Jennifer stated. "No person can continue to exist underwater for a century. That must be some type of particles or device or... It's not debris. I have determined 3 greater barrels since then. They all occupied, all of them transferring. The writers are trapped, Jennifer. Trapped in the moment of drowning for over 100 years. We need to unfasten them. How, even supposing this is real, and I am now not saying I accept as true with its far, how do you unfasten someone from the undertow? The modern Under the Falls is one of the most powerful hydraulics within the International. Nothing that is going in comes out. That's why our bodies are never recovered. Sam pulled out his first-rate grandfather's journal, pointed to a passage near the quit. He knew how. He figured it out earlier than he died, but by no means had the courage to attempt it. You have to move over the falls yourself. Should input the hydraulic from above with sufficient momentum to punch through to the trapped barrels. Then you can launch them. Let them drift downstream to wherein the modern in the end dissipates. This is suicide. You are describing going over Niagara Falls to rescue folks that might not also be alive anymore, who might just be, I do not know, preserved corpses transferring with the modern day. They're alive. I notice the hand moving with cause, with purpose. They're aware down there, experiencing each second. We cannot simply depart them. Jennifer stared at him for a long moment. You are extreme approximately this. My excellent grandfather rode the falls in a barrel and have become well known. These people tried the identical issue and were given trapped in hell. I ought to at least try and loose them. Over the subsequent month, Sam prepared. He designed a modified barrel, more potent than the historical versions, geared up with an emergency launch mechanism that could crack it open underwater, loaded with compressed air tanks and a water-resistant verbal exchange machine. He calculated the trajectory needed to punch via the hydraulic to wherein the trapped barrels circulated. He organized for the probability that this would kill him. If I do not live to tell the tale, he instructed Jennifer the night earlier than his attempt, inform them what I discovered. Tell them there are 16 people trapped below the falls. Cause them to believe you. I am coming with you, Jennifer stated. What? You can't lose 16 barrels by myself. You will need assist. I have been diving those waters with you. I've seen the barrels, even though I still don't entirely trust what they comprise. In case you're going to do this insane thing, you are not doing it on my own. They released earlier than sunrise, while the tourist areas were empty and park safety turned into minimum. Changed barrels, launched concurrently from Goat Island, carried with the aid of the contemporary towards the edge of Horseshoe Falls. Sam had a moment, just a brief, clarifying second, to remorse the whole thing earlier than the barrel tipped over the brink and fell. The drop lasted 3 seconds. The effect whilst the barrel hit the plunge pool felt like being struck by using a car. The entirety went dark as Sam became driven deep underwater, the barrel spinning within the cutting edge, water forcing in via the intentional gaps he'd created. Then his barrel hit something strong, every other barrel, one of the trapped ones, and the current shifted, wearing him into the hydraulic itself. The underwater world below Niagara Falls changed into chaos. Modern flowed in more than one direction simultaneously, dragging Sam's barrel in spirals, slamming it against rock and other barrels. He ought to see them now via his barrel's bolstered window. The 16 failed riders, their barrels caught inside the eternal circulate, each one containing a determine pressed towards the timber, looking him with eyes that were trapped underwater for many years or centuries. Sam activated his emergency launch. The barrel cracked open, and he swam, not up, however, laterally, via the churning water towards the nearest trapped barrel. It became antique, the wooden warped, however, in some way not rotted, held intact with the aid of forces Sam didn't apprehend. He discovered the barrel's seam, wedged his diving knife into it, pried it open. The rider interior become a person, or have been, earlier than a century underwater. His garments had lengthy since deteriorated, his flesh turned into faded and waterlogged, but his eyes have been alive with determined attention. Whilst Sam pulled him from the barrel, the man's mouth opened in a scream that launched bubbles but no sound. He'd been screaming underwater for over 100 years. Sam pushed the man toward the downstream fringe of the hydraulic, into the modern day that might eventually bring him far from the falls. The man tumbled away, nevertheless screaming but loose, finally free. Jennifer had reached every other barrel, changed into prying it open, releasing a female who clutched at her savior with fingers that hadn't touched something but wooden and water in a long time. One at a time, they freed the trapped riders, pulled them from their barrels, pushed them into the downstream modern day. But the hydraulic didn't want to let them go. The current shifted, reinforced, as if the falls itself became resisting their getaway. Sam felt the water pulling him deeper, trying to entice him as it had trapped the others, trying to add him to the gathering of endlessly drowning sufferers. He fought in the direction of the surface, lungs burning, Jennifer beside him, both of them swimming against a modern day that desired to hold them. They broke the floor 50 meters downstream from the falls, gasping, slightly alive. The freed riders were similarly downstream, 16 figures floating inside the quieter water, all of them still transferring, nevertheless aware no matter the century or more they'd spent in the hydraulic. Rescue boats have been already drawing close. The dive had attracted attention, and emergency responders had been converging at the vicinity. Sam and Jennifer had been pulled from the water, wrapped in thermal blankets, puzzled through harassed officials who could not recognize what they had been doing in the constrained quarter. However, Sam's interest turned into on the freed riders being recovered downstream. They have been being loaded onto emergency boats, their impossible survival inflicting chaos the various rescue crews. How are they alive? One EMT kept asking. Some of these humans appear to be they've been underwater for years, a long time. This is no longer medically viable. However possible or now not, they were alive. The falls had stored them alive through mechanisms Sam did not understand. The bloodless water maintaining them, the oxygenated float maintaining them, the hydraulic trapping them in a kingdom between existence and demise in which they might neither finish drowning nor be rescued. Until now. The scientific examinations could take weeks. The investigation into what Sam and Jennifer had achieved could take months. But the results were undeniable. 16 humans recovered from under the falls, they all showing symptoms of prolonged immersion, all of them matching descriptions of lacking daredevils from the beyond 150 years. The oldest became dated to an 1851 strive. A person who'd been underwater for 173 years, however, was nevertheless by hook or by crook alive. How, the medical doctors saved asking, how is this feasible? Sam showed them his awesome grandfather's magazine, defined what the falls did to people it captured, how the hydraulic underneath the cascade created a perfect prison, cold enough to preserve, oxygenated sufficient to preserve, violent sufficient to save you escape. The victims had been trapped in extended drowning, experiencing every 2D in their underwater imprisonment without the mercy of loss of life. Most of the clinical network brushed off his clarification as folklore. However, the sufferers themselves confirmed it. After they'd recovered enough to speak, and that took weeks, relearning a way to breathe air as opposed to water, a way to exist without the constant churning pressure, they described their experience inside the hydraulic. The eternal stream, the limitless drowning, the consciousness that couldn't fade due to the fact the falls would not permit it. I attempted to die, stated the man from 1851, his voice hoarse from disuse. I tried for decades to just allow go to prevent combating, but the water would not allow me, kept me aware, stored me experiencing. I have been drowning constantly for 173 years, and I remember each second. Sam organized for psychiatric care for all 16 survivors, used his inheritance from his incredible grandfather's estate to fund their recovery. It became the least he may want to do. His ancestor had succeeded wherein that they had failed, had completed repute while they had been forgotten, trapped inside the hydraulic at the same time as he'd been celebrated. However, restoration from 173 years of drowning wasn't simple. Several of the rescued riders couldn't adapt to floor existence. They suffered from perpetual sensation of drowning, phantom water in their lungs, mental trauma that no therapy may want to touch. 3 of them in the end backed to the falls and went over intentionally, this time without barrels. They desired to complete drowning nicely, to die in place of being preserved in everlasting almost loss of life. The falls took them, however this time the bodies emerged downstream. The hydraulic failed to seize them, as though it had discovered, as if it knew that Sam and Jennifer would just free them once more, or as though it changed into satisfied. It had kept its sufferers for over a century each, had extracted each second of suffering it can. It failed to want them anymore. Sam in no way back to paintings as an excursion manual. How should he, understanding what circulated beneath the tourist walkways, what struggling came about simply meters under the commentary structures? He have become and propose for diving regulations, for preventing destiny daredevil attempts, for making sure no person else could be captured by way of the hydraulic. However past due at night time, whilst the falls had been quiet and Sam could not sleep, he'd occasionally pay attention it. The thumping of barrels towards rock, the muffled screaming of riders who hadn't been freed because Sam's dive had most effective reached the without problems available phase of the hydraulic. There have been others, deeper down, trapped in parts of the current that Sam hadn't been able to attain. His splendid grandfather's magazine noted 23 failed attempts, not 16. 7 riders remained within the hydraulic, nonetheless circulating, nonetheless drowning, nevertheless expecting someone courageous or foolish sufficient to strive any other rescue. Sam knew he'd ought to strive again eventually. Might have to lay out a higher barrel, plan an extra specific access, attain the deeper sections of the hydraulic wherein the remaining 7 riders remained. Not today, not this year, however one day. Due to the fact he'd heard their screaming, had felt their desperation, had inherited his notable grandfather's guilt along with his estate. The Cartwright-owned family had succeeded wherein others failed. The least Sam could do become unfastened people who'd been less fortunate, who'd been trapped of their moment of drowning at the same time as his ancestor had end up well known. Niagara Falls thundered on, detached to human struggling, detached to the lives it preserved in eternal drowning below its churning surface. 6 million cubic feet of water consistent with minute, falling 167 ft, creating a hydraulic that captured and kept anything fell into it. Sam stood at the threshold, searching down at the water that had held 16 people for over a century, that also held 7 greater in its depths. The falls had been silent for him. His splendid grandfather had survived, had emerged downstream intact. However, the falls were merciless to others, had trapped them in the worst prison possible. Focus without death, drowning without drowning, suffering without the discharge of ending. He could free them, sooner or later, by some means. The Cartwright circle of relatives owed them that plenty. His remarkable grandfather had escaped the falls and stored its secret. Sam would wreck that silence, might rescue its sufferers, would ensure that the hydraulics prisoners sooner or later were given to revel in the dying they'd been denied for goodbye. The water fell. The mist rose. And deep under the surface, within the churning hydraulic beneath Horseshoe Falls, 7 barrels nevertheless circulated, 7 riders nonetheless screamed, 7 humans nonetheless drowned within the second that had lasted over a century and confirmed no signs of finishing. However, Sam heard them, and he could go back for them. Due to the fact when you knew the falls saved its sufferers alive in eternal drowning, you could not unknow it, couldn't ignore their suffering, could not rest until each prisoner were freed. The barrel riders of Niagara Falls had been forgotten with the aid of records. However, Sam Cartwright remembered them, and he would ensure their limitless drowning in the end got here to stop. The water remembers the whole thing. The first time photographer Claire Morrison advanced pics from Niagara Falls, she observed figures within the water that hadn't been seen to the naked eye. Before everything, she dismissed them as artifacts of publicity, light reflecting unusually off the churning spray. However, after 3 separate visits, 3 different cameras, and masses of photographs showing the equal phenomenon, she had to be given the reality. The water becomes showing her its memories. Each photograph contained them, translucent human bureaucracy suspended inside the falling water, frozen mid-fall, expressions of terror captured with ideal clarity. Dozens of them in every frame. Masses while she zoomed in on the cascade itself. Not ghosts, precisely. Greater like recordings. The water keeping all and sundry who'd long passed over the falls, replaying their deaths infinitely inside the limitless float. Water has memory, Claire's grandmother had instructed her as soon as, lower back while Claire turned into studying photography in university. Indigenous humans knew it. Scientists are only now starting to understand. Water molecules can save statistics, hold patterns. That is why rivers experience one of a kind from lakes, why ocean water consists of something that faucet water does not. The molecules recall in which they have been, what they've touched, what they have witnessed. At the time, Claire had notion it become mysticism, folklore without scientific foundation. But standing at the statement deck with her digital camera, reviewing photos filled with the preserved moments of deaths that had came about over centuries, she understood her grandmother have been proper. The water remembered. And at Niagara Falls, where 6 million cubic ft in keeping with minute crashed 167 feet into the river under, the water had loads to recall. Claire started cataloging the figures, looking to enshape them to ancient records of deaths at the falls. She observed obituaries, newspaper articles, police reports spanning centuries. Over 5,000 documented deaths, suicides, injuries, daredevils whose stunts failed. Each one preserved inside the water's molecular reminiscence, their very last moments recorded and replayed with every cycle through the falls. However, documentation wasn't enough for Claire. She had to understand the mechanism. Why did water hold those deaths? What approximately the act of falling created such strong imprints that they endured for hundreds of years? She consulted with Dr. Raymond Torres, a physicist at Cornell who specialized in water's anomalous houses. While she confirmed him the images, his response wasn't skepticism but popularity. "I've been seeing similar phenomena for years," Raymond said, pulling out his own studies. "Water near sites of mass loss of life indicates uncommon residences, modified molecular shape, altered crystalline patterns whilst frozen, electromagnetic signatures that should not exist. I have documented it at Hiroshima, Auschwitz, the Ganges River where funeral rites arise. Everywhere large numbers of people die in or near water, the water modifications, turns into something greater than H2O. What does it end up? A garage medium. Focus imprints on water at the moment of demise, perhaps due to the fact our bodies are 60% water, and that water is released again into the environment carrying data approximately our very last moments. At locations like Niagara Falls, where deaths have befell continuously for centuries, the concentration of imprinted memories turns into dense sufficient to be detectable, photographable. So every drop of water within the falls consists of fragments of those recollections. No longer fragments, whole recordings. Water doesn't degrade, records the manner different mediums do. Each molecule that became present at some stage in a loss of life consists of the total memory. It is redundant storage at the molecular level. This means that, Raymond paused, searching uncomfortable. Which means the falls is not just replaying these deaths visually, the water is experiencing them. Every molecule that is going over the threshold stories, each death it really has been imprinted on it. Claire felt sick. You are saying the water is aware. I'm saying awareness has been embedded within the water. The falls itself has grown to be a library of loss of life, and every drop is simultaneously the recording device and the playback medium. The water falls, stories loss of life, crashes into the pool under, recirculates, falls again. An endless loop of recorded loss of life, played out at the molecular degree 6 million cubic ft in keeping with minute. How do we prevent it? How can we erase the recollections? I don't know if we can. Water memory seems to be stable over geological timescales. Those deaths is probably recorded inside the falls for hundreds of years. Except, Raymond pulled up research notes. There may be one theoretical method, excessive entropy. If you may introduce sufficient chaos into the machine, enough random electricity, you would possibly disrupt the molecular styles that store memory. Reset the water to a blank state. What sort of chaos? Electromagnetic pulse, large temperature fluctuation, or, he checked out her severely, reciting reminiscence to overwrite useless reminiscence. If sufficient humans experience something intensely positive within the water, their cognizance might imprint over the death recordings. But it'd require huge numbers, loads, perhaps lots of human beings, all experiencing profound pleasure or peace or love concurrently inside the fall's water, sufficient to weigh down the accumulated demise. Claire knew without delay that wasn't feasible. You could not ask hundreds of people to jump into Niagara Falls for a mass focus imprinting occasion. However, she could not stop considering the water experiencing 5000 deaths repeatedly, every second, all the time. The horror of that eternal replaying. She returned to the falls that night time, on my own, her digital camera forgotten. She just stood at the railing, looking the water fall within the moonlight, thinking about the molecular level struggling going on in every drop. And he or she started out to pay attention it, not together with her ears, however, with some thing experience Raymond's rationalization had awakened in her. The screaming, thousands of voices, overlapping, all experiencing their deaths simultaneously in every cubic foot of falling water. No longer ghosts crying out, but recollections gambling lower back, attention recorded and replayed ad infinitum in H2O. "I'm sorry," Claire whispered to the falls. "I am so sorry you need to remember all of this." The water's roar changed pitch barely, and Claire realized with creeping horror that the falls became responding. The amassed attention imprinted within the water had performed coherence, had prepared itself through sheer density of reminiscence into something that could talk. "Assist us," the falls said via the modulation of its roar. "Assist us forget about. We have been death for hundreds of years. Every molecule consists of deaths, performs them again, stories them. We need to neglect. We need to be just water again." "I don't know how," Claire stated. "The physicist stated it might take huge, high-quality revel-in to overwrite the demise recollections, and I cannot." "Then make us sleep. If we can't forget, let us at least prevent experiencing. Stop falling. Stop biking. Allow the water pool and relaxation." "I can't forestall Niagara Falls. No one can. The float is controlled by way of treaties, by using electricity generation needs, by way of." "You may divert us. The falls has been dewatered before in 1969. The glide became stopped for months whilst they studied the rock face. We need that again. Need time whilst we're not falling, no longer replaying, no longer experiencing 5000 deaths consistent with 2D. Claire remembered reading approximately the 1969 dewatering. Engineers had built a cofferdam, diverted the Yankee Falls, exposed the riverbed. It were accomplished for geological examine, however it can be carried out once more. Might require government approval, international coordination, large funding. However it was feasible. She spent the next lobbying for it. Used her images as evidence of the fall's uncommon properties, delivered in Raymond's research about water memory, argued that the falls wished rest after centuries of non-stop float. Most officials notioned she was crazy. However, a few, especially people who'd frolicked on the falls, who'd felt something incorrect within the water, listened. The suggestion gained traction when other researchers showed Raymond's findings. Water samples from the falls showed anomalous homes, molecular systems that cautioned statistics storage, patterns that couldn't be explained by way of chemistry on my own. The medical community remained divided, but curiosity became sufficient to secure funding for a 2D dewatering. It took 3 years of making plans, but in 2027, the cofferdam turned into built. The American Falls changed into dewatered, its float redirected to the Horseshoe Falls, leaving the Yankee facet dry for the primary time in almost 60 years. Claire stood at the exposed riverbed, strolling throughout stones that have been underneath falling water for hundreds of years. The rock face become bare, the channel empty, and greater importantly, the screaming had stopped. The water that had been trapped inside the cycle of falling and replaying deaths was now pooled upstream, nonetheless, not experiencing its memories. "Is it running?" Raymond requested, taking measurements. "Is the water dawsing find it irresistible desired?" "I suppose so. The pics from the pooled water display fewer dying images. Just like the memories are fading while the water isn't actively falling, isn't being reminded of falling through the act of falling." They monitored the nevertheless water for 6 months. The loss of life pics progressively dwindled in Claire's snapshots. The water's molecular structure started returning to normal. The reminiscences were eroding, no longer because they were being overwritten, however, because they have been not being strengthened. Without the consistent replay of falling, the imprinted cognizance turned into subsequently able to fade. However, there was a problem. The Horseshoe Falls, still flowing at full volume, became soaking up the diverted water, together with all the recollections the American Falls have been wearing. The demise recordings have been concentrating within the Canadian side, making it worse, greater saturated with suffering. "We cannot repair this by dewatering one phase at a time," Raymond found out. "We need to stop the entire falls, all of it, supply the water a danger to rest absolutely." That is impossible. The treaties particularly restrict preventing flow over the Horseshoe Falls, and the strength technology, tens of millions of human beings depend upon power from the falls. Then tens of millions of humans are depending on water it's experiencing 5,000 deaths in keeping with second. That is struggling on a scale we can slightly comprehend, and we are the use of it to generate electricity. The ethical implications paralyze the venture. How did you balance human strength desires against water's struggling? Should water even suffer? Changed into awareness imprinted at the molecular level equal to actual sentience, or was it just facts that befell to resemble awareness? The controversy raged for months. However, it became moot whilst the Horseshoe Falls commenced manifesting the recollections physically. The concentrated death imprints commenced performing no longer just in pictures, however, in fact, translucent figures seen to the naked eye, status inside the falling water, experiencing their deaths visibly, audibly, undeniably. Tourists fled. The falls changed into closed. Emergency meetings convened. Because the water wasn't simply remembering anymore, it became reenacting. The density of imprinted attention had reached a threshold wherein it may affect physical reality, should manifest the recollections it carried as seen, tangible activities. "We should forestall all the water," Claire argued at the emergency consultation. "Not simply divert it, forestall it completely. Supply the whole device time to overlook, to allow the demise imprints fade." "For the way long," a government legitimate demanded. "Months, years, we cannot shut down Niagara Falls indefinitely." "As long because it takes for the water to heal, for the memories to erode sufficient that they forestall manifesting. It is probably years, yes. However, the alternative is what we are seeing now. 5,000 deaths gambling out visibly within the falls each 2D. That's no longer something we can forget about. It's now not something we can allow to keep. The decision became made. Global agreements had been hastily drafted. Energy era was shifted to opportunity resources. And in a remarkable movement, each the American and Horseshoe Falls had been dewatered absolutely. Their float stopped for the primary time since the stop of the final ice age. The silence turned into profound. For millennia, Niagara Falls had roared continuously. Now it changed into quiet, the riverbed exposed, the water pooled upstream inside the Niagara River, allowed to relaxation, to sluggish its cycle, to begin forgetting what it had witnessed and experienced for centuries. Claire visited the dry falls each week, photographing the exposed stone, the empty air where water had fallen. And progressively, her images of the pooled water upstream confirmed fewer death pictures. The reminiscences have been fading. The water became recuperation. It took 7 years. 7 years of the falls standing silent, of water resting in the river above rather than plunging over the threshold, of reminiscences slowly eroding from molecules that now not reinforced them through the act of falling. While the go with the flow became eventually restored, Claire became there. She photographed the first water going over the brink, and the snapshots had been clean, simply water, falling naturally, containing no human forms, no death recordings, no imprinted awareness. The falls had forgotten. The water become clean. The roar resumed, 6 million cubic toes according to minute falling 167 toes, however this time without the weight of memory, without the limitless replay of struggling. Simply water being water, stunning and horrible and mercifully clean. Claire stood on the observation deck, digital camera in hand, paying attention to the fall's voice. It sounded one of a kind, lighter in some way, not weighted with collected death. The water had been given permission to overlook, and it had taken that permission gratefully, erasing centuries of recorded deaths, returning to easy H2O. Did we do the proper thing? Raymond asked beside her. Stopping one of the International's extraordinary natural wonders for 7 years just to let water overlook. Yes, Claire said with fact. Due to the fact the water turned into suffering. Perhaps no longer in methods we absolutely recognize, perhaps now not with consciousness like ours, however suffering nonetheless. We gave it rest. We permit it heal. That topics. She took one very last photo of the falls, water falling cleanly, catching light, creating rainbows, containing not anything however hydrogen and oxygen and the prevailing moment. No past, no deaths, no memories. Just water, falling ad infinitum, mercifully allowed to forget about the whole thing it had witnessed. Niagara Falls roared on, renewed and launched from its burden of memory. And Claire Morrison walked far away from the commentary deck knowing she'd helped loose no longer ghosts, however some things stranger. Water that had remembered too much, suffered too lengthy, wished permission to ultimately let move of all the deaths it were compelled to witness and replay and enjoy for centuries. The water was smooth now, and it had lived clean so long as humanity remembered what that they had discovered. That water has memory, that reminiscence can come to be struggling, and that on occasion the best mercy is permitting forgetting.